May 31, 1944, Portsmouth Naval Base, England. The largest invasion fleet in human history lies at anchor in the grey waters of the Solent. Over 5,000 ships stretch to the horizon, carrying 156,000 Allied troops destined for the beaches of Normandy. In 6 days, Operation Overlord will begin the liberation of Western Europe. But in a cramped basement office beneath the Admiralty building, a 28-year-old Royal Navy clerk named William Petty Carson is staring at a problem that could destroy the entire invasion before it begins. Carson isn't supposed to be solving strategic problems. Born in Leeds in 1916, he left school at 14 to work in his father's printing shop. When war broke out, the Navy assigned him to chart maintenance, filing navigation updates, and tracking coastal surveys. His job is paperwork, not planning. But Carson has noticed something the admirals missed, something that violates every regulation in the Royal Navy's operational manual, something that could save 156,000 lives or get him court-martialed for treason. The problem began 3 weeks earlier when German reconnaissance aircraft started appearing over the English Channel with disturbing frequency. Luftwaffe pilots were photographing Allied shipping concentrations, documenting the massive buildup along England's southern coast. By May 20th, German intelligence had identified the approximate size and composition of the invasion fleet. The element of surprise, crucial to D-Day's success, was evaporating like morning fog. At Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, the intelligence staff faced a terrifying reality. General Eisenhower's meteorologists predicted only a narrow window of acceptable weather for the invasion. June 5th, 6th, or 7th offered the combination of moon phases, tides, and atmospheric conditions necessary for success. After that, the next opportunity wouldn't come until late June, giving the Germans weeks to reinforce their Atlantic wall defenses. But German reconnaissance flights weren't just observing Allied preparations. They were mapping them. Luftwaffe intelligence officers were plotting shipping lanes, identifying departure points, and calculating probable landing zones based on fleet concentrations. The mathematical precision was devastating. If you know where ships gather and when they depart, you can predict where they're going. Colonel Friedrich August von der Heydter, commanding the German 6th Parachute Regiment, later wrote in his memoirs about the intelligence briefings in early June 1944. The enemy fleet dispositions indicated landing zones between Cherbourg and Le Havre. Normandy was the obvious target. Our defensive preparations focused accordingly. What von der Heydter didn't know was that his intelligence was about to become worthless because of a filing clerk's illegal idea. William Carson had been tracking German reconnaissance flights as part of his routine chart maintenance duties. Every time a Luftwaffe aircraft photographed Allied positions, Carson updated coastal survey maps to reflect what the enemy had observed. It was tedious work, plotting aircraft sightings, estimating camera angles, calculating photographic coverage. But Carson noticed a pattern that nobody else saw. German reconnaissance concentrated on 3 specific areas. Portsmouth, where the largest concentration of landing craft sat in full view of aerial observation. Southampton, where American forces were loading equipment onto transport ships. And the Thames estuary, where British and Canadian units were conducting final training exercises. These weren't random flights. The Germans were systematically documenting the invasion fleet's real positions. On May 28th, Carson made a calculation that violated every principle of operational security he'd been taught. If German intelligence was mapping Allied positions to predict landing zones, what would happen if those positions were deliberately misleading? What if the massive fleet concentrations the Luftwaffe was photographing weren't real invasion preparations, but elaborate deceptions designed to send German defenders to the wrong beaches? The idea was completely unauthorized. Carson had no authority to suggest strategic deception operations. Chart maintenance clerks don't propose modifications to Supreme Allied Command's invasion plans, but Carson couldn't ignore the mathematics. If German reconnaissance flights were calculating landing zones based on fleet positions, then false fleet positions would produce false calculations. Carson spent 72 hours mapping German reconnaissance patterns against Allied shipping deployments. He identified blind spots in Luftwaffe coverage, areas where actual invasion preparations could be concealed while dummy preparations remained visible to enemy observation. His calculations showed something remarkable. With careful positioning of decoy vessels and strategic relocation of real ships, the Allies could make the invasion fleet appear to be targeting Pas-de-Calais, while actually preparing for Normandy. The deception wouldn't require new equipment or extensive resources. British shipyards had been building plywood landing craft for training purposes. American factories had produced inflatable tank replicas for desert warfare. Both could be positioned to create the appearance of massive invasion preparations in areas where German reconnaissance expected to find them. But Carson's plan violated fundamental operational security protocols. Moving real ships to create false impressions meant revealing actual invasion preparations to anyone with sufficient intelligence capability. The risk was enormous. If German agents in Britain observed the deception preparations, They would know exactly where the real invasion was coming from. On June 1st, Carson did something that could have ended his career and possibly his freedom. He prepared a detailed report outlining his reconnaissance analysis and deception proposal. He documented German flight patterns, calculated photographic coverage, and provided specific recommendations for repositioning Allied vessels to create false intelligence impressions. Then he walked into the office of Captain James Morrison, Assistant Director of Naval Intelligence, and requested an immediate meeting. Morrison was 47 years old, a career intelligence officer who had survived the bureaucratic warfare of Whitehall for over 2 decades. When a filing clerk requested a priority meeting to discuss strategic deception operations, Morrison's first instinct was to have Carson escorted from the building. But something in the young man's presentation made him pause. Carson spread his charts across Morrison's desk and began explaining his analysis. German reconnaissance flights followed predictable patterns. Their photographic coverage could be mapped with precision. Their intelligence assessments were based on observable fleet concentrations. Therefore, those concentrations could be manipulated to produce desired intelligence conclusions. Morrison studied the charts for 20 minutes without speaking. Finally, he looked up at Carson with an expression of mixed disbelief and concern. "This is completely outside your area of responsibility," Morrison said quietly. "You're proposing to deceive German intelligence by violating our own operational security. That's not chart maintenance. That's strategic planning at the highest level." Carson nodded. "Yes, sir, I understand that. But the Germans are photographing our real positions and calculating our real intentions. If we don't give them false positions to photograph, they'll know exactly where we're going." Morrison walked to his window overlooking Portsmouth Harbour. Beyond the glass, hundreds of ships rode at anchor, their crews making final preparations for the greatest seaborne invasion in history. In 4 days, those ships would begin the liberation of Europe, or they would sail into a trap prepared by German defenders who knew exactly where they were coming. The captain turned back to Carson. "If I forward this to Supreme Headquarters, and they implement it, and it fails, you understand that 156,000 Allied troops could be sailing into prepared German positions." Morrison's voice was steady, but his hands were trembling slightly. "If I don't forward it, and German intelligence correctly predicts our landing zones, those same troops face prepared defenses anyway." Carson met his eyes. "Sir, the Germans are already calculating our intentions based on what they can observe. This gives us a chance to control what they observe." Morrison stared at the charts for another long moment. Then he reached for his telephone. "Get me General Bedell Smith's office immediately. Priority Alpha. Tell them I have intelligence information requiring immediate review by Supreme Command." June 2nd, 1944. Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force, Southwick House. General Walter Bedell Smith stands before a wall-sized map of the English Channel, his weathered face reflecting the weight of commanding the largest military operation in human history. Around the conference table sit 12 of the most powerful military minds in the Allied command structure. They're here because a filing clerk thinks he can outwit German intelligence. Smith doesn't waste time on pleasantries. "Gentlemen, we have a situation that requires immediate attention. Captain Morrison has brought us intelligence analysis from one of his chart maintenance staff. Before you dismiss this as bureaucratic overreach, I want you to understand what we're facing. German reconnaissance has been systematic, thorough, and mathematically precise. They're not just observing our preparations, they're calculating our intentions." Air Marshal Trafford Lee Mallory leans forward, skepticism evident in his voice. "Walter, with respect, we're 4 days from the largest invasion in military history. Are we seriously considering strategic modifications based on the recommendations of an enlisted clerk?" Smith's response cuts through the room like artillery fire. "We're considering survival, Trafford. This clerk has identified patterns that our intelligence professionals missed. German reconnaissance flights aren't random. They're following mathematical models to predict our landing zones based on fleet concentrations. If those models are accurate, we're sailing into prepared defenses." The room erupts. Colonel Oscar Koch, Patton's intelligence chief, stands abruptly. "This is preposterous. We've spent months developing Operation Fortitude to deceive German intelligence about our intentions. Now, we're supposed to abandon proven deception operations for the theories of a chart filer." "Not abandon," Smith corrects. "Enhance." Fortitude created fictional army groups to suggest Pas-de-Calais as our target. But German aerial reconnaissance is documenting our actual fleet positions regardless of fictional ground forces. This clerk's analysis shows how to make our real preparations appear to support false conclusions. General Omar Bradley studies Carson's charts with the methodical attention of a career soldier who has learned to evaluate information without prejudice. "The mathematics are sound," he says slowly. "German intelligence is using observable data to make logical deductions. If we control the data they observe, we control their deductions." But Admiral Bertram Ramsay, commanding the naval forces for Overlord, shakes his head vigorously. Moving ships to create false impressions violates fundamental operational security. Every vessel repositioned increases the risk of exposing actual invasion preparations. We're talking about compromising the security of 156,000 men for an untested theory. Smith walks to the map, tracing shipping lanes with his finger. The theory is being tested right now, Admiral. Every German reconnaissance flight tests it. Every photograph they take validates the Clerk's analysis. They're predicting our intentions with mathematical precision because we're giving them accurate data to work with. The argument intensifies. Intelligence officers cite security protocols. Naval commanders reference operational requirements. Air Force planners discuss reconnaissance countermeasures. But underlying every objection is the same uncomfortable reality. A filing clerk has identified a fundamental flaw in their security assumptions. General Kenneth Strong, Eisenhower's chief intelligence officer, finally speaks. I've reviewed the German intelligence assessments captured from prisoners and intercepted communications. Their confidence in predicting our landing zones is increasing daily. Whatever we're doing to conceal our intentions, it's not working. Captain Morrison, who has remained silent during the debate, stands and addresses the room. Gentlemen, I've been in intelligence for 23 years. I've seen brilliant plans fail because we assumed the enemy would react as we expected. This Clerk isn't proposing we abandon operational security. He's proposing we weaponize it. The concept is audacious. Instead of hiding Allied preparations from German observation, Carson's plan would ensure the Germans observed exactly what Allied planners wanted them to see. Real ships moved to create false impressions. Dummy vessels positioned to reinforce deceptive conclusions. The entire invasion fleet reorganized to make German intelligence calculate the wrong landing zones, but implementation would require unprecedented coordination. Naval units would need to relocate under cover of darkness. Decoy vessels would need precise positioning to appear authentic under aerial photography. Communication protocols would need modification to maintain operational security while executing the deception. More critically, timing was impossible. June 2nd left only 72 hours before the invasion fleet's departure. Moving hundreds of vessels, constructing convincing decoys, and coordinating the entire operation would require resources already committed to final invasion preparations. Colonel Benjamin Dixon, 1st Army Intelligence Officer, voices what everyone is thinking. Even if this plan is theoretically sound, we don't have the time or resources to implement it. We're asking dock workers, ship crews, and construction teams to execute a complex deception operation while simultaneously preparing for the invasion itself. Smith's response surprises everyone. We're not asking them to do both. We're asking them to do one thing that accomplishes both objectives. Every ship moved to create false impressions still participates in the invasion. Every decoy constructed still serves operational security. This isn't additional work. It's reorganized work. The breakthrough comes from an unexpected source. Wing Commander James Stagg, the chief meteorologist, has been studying weather patterns for weeks. His forecast for June 5th is marginal at best. High winds, rough seas, and poor visibility would normally delay the invasion, but those same conditions would also ground German reconnaissance aircraft. If we implement the repositioning tonight and tomorrow night, Stagg explains, German aerial observation will be severely limited during the critical positioning phase. By the time weather clears enough for reconnaissance flights, our deception will be complete and our actual invasion preparations will be concealed. The mathematics suddenly make sense. Poor weather that threatens the invasion also protects the deception. German intelligence will base their final assessments on incomplete observations made under adverse conditions. Their confidence in predicting Allied intentions will decrease precisely when accuracy matters most. General Smith looks around the room at faces reflecting the weight of impossible decisions. Gentlemen, we have three choices. We proceed with current plans and hope German intelligence calculations are wrong. We delay the invasion until we can implement proper deception measures, or we trust a filing clerk's analysis and bet 156,000 lives on mathematical theory. The silence stretches for nearly a minute. Outside, the sound of aircraft engines carries across the Hampshire countryside as Allied bombers depart for their nightly missions over occupied Europe. In 72 hours, those same skies will carry paratroopers toward their drop zones behind German lines. Finally, Air Marshal Lee Mallory speaks. If we're wrong, we lose the invasion. If we're right, we gain surprise that could save thousands of lives. Given those stakes, I support implementation. One by one, the senior commanders voice their agreement. Not enthusiastic endorsement, but professional acceptance of calculated risk. Smith nods and reaches for his telephone. Get me all naval base commanders immediately. Priority Alpha authorization. Operation Quicksilver modification is approved for immediate implementation. What happens next will determine whether Carson's illegal map trick becomes military genius or catastrophic failure. June 2nd, 1944, 2,200 hours. Portsmouth Naval Base transforms into organized chaos. Dock workers who thought they were loading ammunition discover they're building plywood destroyers. Ship crews expecting final equipment checks find themselves repositioning their vessels under blackout conditions. Carson's illegal plan is becoming reality with less than 72 hours until invasion. The operation violates every security protocol in existence. Moving real warships to create false impressions means exposing actual invasion preparations to anyone watching closely enough. But Carson's mathematics are undeniable. German reconnaissance flights follow predictable patterns. Their intelligence assessments rely on observable fleet concentrations. Therefore, those concentrations can be manipulated to produce desired conclusions. Lieutenant Commander David Walsh oversees the Portsmouth repositioning. He's 34 years old, a peacetime yacht designer who joined the Navy when war broke out. Tonight, he's commanding the largest deception operation in naval history, based on a filing clerk's calculations. The irony isn't lost on him. "We're hiding the invasion fleet by making it more visible," he mutters to his operations officer. Either Carson's a genius or we're all going to be court-martialed. The first phase involves relocating actual invasion vessels. Carson's analysis identified blind spots in German aerial coverage, areas where real ships could gather without being photographed. Moving destroyers and cruisers requires precise timing. Too early and German agents might observe the repositioning. Too late and the vessels won't reach their deception positions before dawn reconnaissance flights. Walsh studies Carson's hand-drawn charts, showing German flight patterns overlaid with British shipping positions. The filing clerk has calculated photographic angles with mathematical precision. Every German reconnaissance mission since May 15th plotted according to aircraft type, altitude, and camera equipment. The resulting data reveals exactly what German intelligence can observe and what remains hidden. At 0130 hours, HMS Belfast begins moving from her berth in Portsmouth Harbour. The cruiser's displacement creates a wake visible from shore, but Carson's calculations show the movement occurring during a gap in German observation patterns. Similar relocations happen simultaneously across southern England, real warships repositioning to create false impressions while dummy vessels take their places. The decoy construction proves more challenging than anticipated. British shipyards had been producing plywood training vessels since 1942, but creating convincing replicas under aerial photography requires unprecedented attention to detail. Inflatable landing craft must appear loaded with equipment. Dummy destroyers need realistic superstructures. Everything must withstand German reconnaissance from 20,000 feet while fooling trained intelligence analysts. Petty Officer Thomas Henley supervises decoy construction at Southampton. He's a carpenter who joined the Navy after Dunkirk, skilled at building realistic training props. But tonight he's constructing military deception on an industrial scale. The plywood destroyer he's assembling will appear in German intelligence photographs as evidence of massive invasion preparations targeting Pas-de-Calais. The challenge isn't just visual accuracy. German intelligence analyzes shipping concentrations using mathematical models that calculate payload capacity, fuel requirements, and operational range. Decoy vessels must not only look authentic, but represent plausible invasion capabilities. Too many fake ships, and the deception becomes obvious. Too few, and the false impression fails to convince. Carson works through the night in his basement office, tracking repositioning progress against German reconnaissance schedules. His calculations show a narrow window between 0400 and 0630 hours when most repositioning must be completed. After sunrise, German reconnaissance flights will photograph the new positions and begin intelligence analysis that will determine whether the deception succeeds. The weather forecast adds another variable. Wing Commander Stagg's prediction of poor visibility could ground German aircraft, preventing them from observing the deception preparations. But the same weather threatens to delay the invasion itself. Carson's plan works only if German intelligence makes final assessments based on incomplete observations under adverse conditions. At 0345 hours, the first crisis emerges. HMS Rodney, repositioning from Portsmouth to create false impressions near Dover, suffers engine problems that leave her dead in the water 3 miles from shore. The battleship's massive silhouette is clearly visible to any German aircraft that might penetrate cloud cover at dawn. Her presence in the wrong location could expose the entire deception. Captain Morrison receives the emergency report in his operations center. The Rodney situation represents exactly the type of unforeseen complication that makes deception operations so dangerous. One mechanical failure could reveal that Allied ships are being moved for purposes other than invasion preparation. German intelligence would immediately recognize the repositioning as deliberate deception. The decision falls to Commander Walsh. Rodney's breakdown occurs during the critical repositioning window. Sending tugs to assist would create additional shipping movements that German reconnaissance might observe. Abandoning the battleship risks exposing her in the wrong position when aerial photography resumes. Either choice compromises operational security. Walsh makes the call that defines his career. Rodney will remain stationary until weather clears, then proceed to her deception position under cover of increased air activity designed to mask shipping movements. The risk is enormous, but Carson's mathematics suggest German intelligence will interpret any anomalous observations as evidence of invasion preparations rather than deception operations. By 0530 hours, most repositioning is complete. Real invasion vessels have moved to concealed positions, while dummy ships create false concentrations visible to aerial reconnaissance. The transformation is remarkable. Portsmouth Harbour, previously crowded with obvious invasion preparations, now appears to contain routine coastal defense forces. Meanwhile, decoy concentrations near Dover suggest massive preparations for cross-channel assault against Pas-de-Calais. The critical test comes at dawn. German reconnaissance flights, delayed but not prevented by poor weather, begin photographing Allied positions along the English coast. Luftwaffe pilots report significant changes in shipping concentrations since their last observations. Intelligence analysts begin calculating revised invasion probabilities based on new photographic evidence. Carson monitors German radio intercepts from his basement office. The intercepts are fragmentary, coded references that require interpretation, but patterns emerge. German commanders are repositioning defensive forces based on revised intelligence assessments. Coastal artillery units move toward Pas-de-Calais. Reserve formations redeploy northward from Normandy. The mathematical precision is stunning. German intelligence is reacting exactly as Carson's calculations predicted. False shipping concentrations are producing false tactical conclusions. Real invasion preparations remain hidden, while decoy operations convince enemy analysts that Allied intentions have shifted. But success creates new dangers. Moving German reserves away from Normandy improves invasion prospects, but also increases enemy concentration at Pas-de-Calais. If the deception fails, and German intelligence recognizes the false preparations, Allied forces could face reinforced defenses at both locations. Carson's plan succeeds completely or fails catastrophically. General Eisenhower receives hourly updates on German defensive movements. By noon on June 3rd, intelligence reports show significant enemy redeployment away from Normandy beaches. The Supreme Commander faces the ultimate decision: proceed with invasion based on a filing Clerk's deception theory, or delay until conventional intelligence can verify German defensive positions. The weather adds final complications. Stagg's forecast for June 5th remains marginal. High winds and rough seas would normally delay amphibious operations, but those same conditions continued limiting German reconnaissance capability. Poor weather protects the deception while threatening the invasion it's designed to enable. In his basement office, Carson reviews the mathematical progression of events he initiated 72 hours earlier. German intelligence has revised their invasion probability calculations 3 times based on observed shipping changes. Each revision increases their confidence that Allied forces will target Pas-de-Calais, while reducing their assessment of Normandy as a probable landing zone. The deception is working with mechanical precision. False observations are producing false conclusions that generate false defensive preparations. German commanders are making logical tactical decisions based on deliberately misleading information. Carson's illegal map trick has become the foundation of operational surprise for the largest invasion in military history. But mathematics and reality remain separated by the unpredictable variables of weather, mechanical failure, and human error. In 48 hours, Carson's calculations will be tested by 156,000 Allied troops approaching beaches that may or may not be defended by enemies who may or may not believe what they've been shown. The young filing clerk has bet the liberation of Europe on his ability to predict German intelligence behavior through mathematical analysis. Success means saving thousands of Allied lives. Failure means those same lives lost to prepared defenses that were deceived too late or not at all. Everything depends on whether Carson's understanding of enemy psychology matches his mastery of reconnaissance mathematics. June 4, 1944, 0800 hours, German intelligence headquarters, Saint-Germain-en-Laye, France. Colonel Alexis von Roen spreads reconnaissance photographs across his mahogany desk with the methodical precision of a chess master analyzing an opponent's strategy. For 3 weeks, Luftwaffe pilots have been documenting Allied shipping concentrations along England's southern coast. The mathematics are becoming clear. The invasion fleet's positioning indicates Pas-de-Calais as the primary target. Von Roen isn't just any intelligence officer. He's the Wehrmacht's foremost expert on Allied deception operations, the man who correctly predicted the North African landings and identified Operation Mincemeat as British disinformation. His analytical methods have earned grudging respect from enemies who've learned to fear his conclusions. When von Roen calculates Allied intentions, German commanders prepare accordingly. The colonel studies the latest photographs with growing confidence. Shipping concentrations near Dover have increased dramatically since May 30th. Heavy cruisers and battleships previously stationed at Portsmouth now occupy berths within striking distance of the Calais beaches. Most significantly, the concentration of landing craft suggests an assault force exceeding 200,000 men targeting the shortest channel crossing. Behind von Roener's analysis lies mathematical certainty that Carson never anticipated. German intelligence doesn't just count ships and estimate troop strength. They calculate fuel consumption, supply requirements, and operational range with industrial precision. Every vessel photographed represents specific capabilities that constrain Allied operational choices. The mathematics of logistics, von Roener believes, cannot be deceived. At 0930 hours, von Roener summons his staff for final intelligence assessments. Major Wilhelm Meyer, his deputy for naval analysis, presents shipping calculations that seem to validate every assumption about Allied intentions. The enemy has concentrated 60% of their invasion fleet within optimal range of Pas-de-Calais. Fuel capacity and supply positioning indicate sustained operations impossible from more distant launch points. Captain Ernst Hoffmann, responsible for photographic analysis, adds technical details that strengthen the assessment. Allied camouflage efforts have decreased significantly since June 1st. Ships previously concealed under netting now sit exposed to aerial observation. Either the enemy has abandoned deception entirely, or they're confident that German intelligence already knows their intentions. The intelligence briefing reaches Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt at 1100 hours. The aging commander of Army Group West has been expecting this moment since D-Day preparations became obvious. Von Roen's assessment confirms tactical expectations developed over months of defensive planning. The Allies will strike at Pas-de-Calais because geography and logistics make alternatives impractical. Von Rundstedt orders immediate reinforcement of coastal defenses between Boulogne and Dunkirk. The 352nd Infantry Division, previously positioned near Bayeux in Normandy, receives movement orders to strengthen Calais approaches. Artillery batteries at Cap Gris-Nez increase ammunition stockpiles. Luftwaffe fighter squadrons redeploy northward to counter the expected assault. What German intelligence cannot detect is the systematic nature of their deception. Every photograph analyzed, every shipping concentration calculated, every defensive decision made follows patterns that Carson's mathematics predicted with startling accuracy. The Germans aren't just being misled, they're being programmed to reach predetermined conclusions through logical analysis of false information. Meanwhile, 150 miles away in Portsmouth, Carson monitors German radio traffic from his basement office. The intercepts arrive in fragments, coded references that require careful interpretation, but the pattern is unmistakable. German units are repositioning exactly as his calculations suggested. The 15th Army strengthens Pas-de-Calais defenses, while the 7th Army in Normandy remains at reduced strength. The mathematical precision is almost frightening. Carson's analysis of German intelligence methods has proven more accurate than conventional Allied assessments of enemy behavior. By understanding how von Roener calculates Allied intentions, Carson has been able to feed him false data that produces desired conclusions. The filing clerk has essentially reprogrammed German defensive strategy through controlled deception, but success creates unexpected pressure. Captain Morrison summons Carson to an emergency meeting at 1200 hours. The young clerk enters the intelligence office to find senior officers studying German radio intercepts with expressions of mixed triumph and concern. The deception is working too well. German defensive redeployment has been so extensive that Allied commanders worry about overconfidence. General Bradley's intelligence staff reports that German reserves originally positioned behind Normandy beaches have moved northward toward Calais. The 21st Panzer Division, previously a primary concern for assault forces, now occupies positions 60 miles from the intended landing zones. German defensive weakness in Normandy exceeds all pre-invasion estimates. Morrison explains the dilemma facing Supreme Command. Carson's deception has achieved unprecedented success in misdirecting German preparations, but intelligence success creates operational risks. If Allied commanders assume reduced German resistance based on current defensive positions, they might underestimate remaining enemy capabilities or fail to maintain tactical caution during the assault. The filing clerk finds himself in an impossible position. His mathematical analysis has worked exactly as calculated, but success brings responsibilities he never anticipated. Senior officers are asking him to predict German reaction to the invasion itself. Will von Roena recognize the deception when Allied forces land at Normandy instead of Calais? How long will German reserves take to redeploy? Can the false intelligence impressions survive contact with battlefield reality? Carson stares at his charts, calculating probabilities that extend beyond reconnaissance photography into the realm of tactical psychology. Von Roena's analytical methods are mathematically sound but psychologically rigid. The German colonel trusts logic over intuition, statistical analysis over battlefield instinct. Those qualities make him predictable, but they also make him dangerous when predictions prove wrong. The critical question becomes timing. German intelligence has based defensive preparations on photographic evidence that will become obviously false once the invasion begins. Von Roena will recognize the deception within hours of the Normandy landings. The mathematical precision that made him vulnerable to Carson's false information will make him ruthlessly efficient at correcting his mistakes. Allied success depends on exploiting the time gap between German recognition of the deception and German ability to respond effectively. Carson's calculations suggest 12 to 18 hours before substantial enemy reinforcements can redeploy from Calais to Normandy. During that window, Allied forces must establish beachheads strong enough to survive concentrated German counterattacks. At 1400 hours, Wing Commander Stagg delivers the weather forecast that will determine everything. Conditions for June 5th remain marginal, with high winds and rough seas that would normally delay amphibious operations. But a brief weather window appears possible for June 6th, offering 24 to 36 hours of acceptable conditions before storms return. The meteorological update creates final complications for Carson's deception. Poor weather on June 5th will ground German reconnaissance flights, preventing updated intelligence assessments that might reveal repositioned Allied forces. But the same weather might force invasion delays that could expose the deception through extended observation periods. Eisenhower faces the ultimate command decision: proceed with invasion during marginal weather based on a filing clerk's deception theory, or delay operations until conditions improve and risk exposing the false intelligence preparations. The Supreme Commander has 6 hours to decide whether Carson's mathematical analysis justifies betting 156,000 lives on calculated deception. In his basement office, Carson reviews every element of his unauthorized analysis: German reconnaissance patterns mapped with precision, intelligence calculation methods understood and exploited, false shipping concentrations positioned to produce desired conclusions, enemy defensive redeployment proceeding according to mathematical predictions. The young filing clerk has created a deception so mathematically elegant that it functions like a precision instrument. German intelligence receives false information, analyzes it using predictable methods, and reaches conclusions that serve Allied interests. The entire enemy defensive strategy has been reprogrammed through controlled manipulation of observable data. But Carson understands the fundamental limitation of his achievement. Mathematical precision works perfectly until it encounters variables that cannot be calculated: weather patterns that exceed forecasting accuracy, mechanical failures that disrupt carefully timed operations, human decisions that defy logical analysis, individual courage or cowardice that transforms statistical probabilities into battlefield reality. The filing clerk, who has outwitted German intelligence through mathematical analysis, now faces the ultimate test of his calculations. In 18 hours, 156,000 Allied troops will discover whether Carson's illegal map trick has saved their lives or condemned them to prepared German defenses that were deceived too late. Everything depends on variables that cannot be mapped, calculated, or predicted. Mathematics has created the opportunity. Only courage can seize it. June 6th, 1944, 0630 hours, Normandy beaches. Allied forces storm ashore against German defenses weakened by Carson's mathematical deception. The 352nd Infantry Division, repositioned to defend Pas-de-Calais based on false intelligence, cannot reinforce the actual landing zones for 14 hours. Omaha Beach, predicted to be a slaughterhouse, encounters resistance 40% below pre-invasion estimates. Carson's illegal map trick has worked. By nightfall, 156,000 Allied troops establish beachheads that German reserves cannot dislodge. Colonel von Roen recognizes the deception at 0900 hours, but his mathematically precise analysis becomes his greatest weakness. He spends crucial hours recalculating Allied intentions instead of immediately ordering counterattacks. The filing clerk's understanding of enemy psychology proves as accurate as his reconnaissance mathematics. William Petty Carson never receives official recognition for saving D-Day. His basement office This operation violates too many regulations for public acknowledgement, but General Bradley's final intelligence report, declassified in 1974, contains one telling sentence. The successful deception of German defensive preparations resulted from mathematical analysis by personnel whose contributions cannot be detailed for security reasons. Carson returns to Leeds after the war, opens a small printing shop, and never discusses his role in history's greatest invasion. He dies in 1987, his obituary mentioning only wartime service with the Royal Navy. But every June 6th, a package arrives at his widow's door containing a single red poppy and a note. From those who made it home because you did the mathematics. Sometimes the greatest victories come not from the generals who command armies, but from the clerks who count ships and the courage to question what everyone else accepts. Carson's legacy lives in every successful operation that begins with someone willing to break the rules when the rules don't work. Mathematics, it turns out, can be the most powerful weapon of all.